My Lords, I want to use my time to speak, not to rehearse the arguments that have already been well rehearsed in the context of the referendum, but to reflect on the significance of the bill that is before this House. We are, after all, discussing the simplest of simple bills, just two clauses, with the simplest of simple objectives, which is to begin the process of carrying out the decision of the British people as expressed in a referendum. A referendum which was based on a bill which this House passed without opposition, and, by the way, a referendum which was held all of 8 months ago. Yet here we are, I have to say, with a two-day debate on the second reading and 184 speakers. I can't remember when we ever had a speakers list quite like this, but it is absolutely in line with the phenomenal focus that this House has shown about the referendum and related matters since June the 23rd last year. Now, I dare say, like one or two other people in this House, I've spent a bit of time during the short recess knocking doors in a by-election. And I have to report to the House that our interest in this subject is not matched by the people on the doorstep. And bearing in mind that one of the reasons most frequently advanced for the Leave vote being so high is that people feel politicians are out of touch. I simply hope that in the months ahead there is a better match between the subjects that we are discussing in this House and those being discussed by our fellow citizens. The fact is, and the polls demonstrate this, that the public have largely made up their mind about the referendum, its significance and the result. An ICM poll on Saturday showed that 68% of us want the government to get on with the process of leaving the European Union. And that includes no less than 48% of those who voted to remain. And that brings me to the role of the Lords in relation to this bill. The first point is something on which I think we all agree. That is the primacy of the Commons. This, of course, expresses itself in a number of different ways. Very rarely, the Commons has to assert itself through the Parliament Act. Much more frequently, the view of the Lords in respect of Commons decisions and the extent to which they're challenged is dependent on the clarity of the judgment that the Commons has made. Well, the message in respect of this bill is clearer than any that I can remember. The Commons decided by a majority of 384 that this bill should become law. And what's more, the Commons verdict is a massive endorsement of an even more important decision which was made by the people in the referendum. And let's be absolutely clear about this. There really is no wriggle room. If you enter a contest or a competition, especially one in which you have written the rules yourself, as we did in the referendum bill, then surely you must accept the result. I say some Remainers, but this was only an advisory referendum. Yes, of course, legally that is true. It is advisory. Parliament could reverse it. There are no substantial constraints on what our Parliament can do, apart, of course, from the very substantial ones applied by the European Union. But politically, and most of all democratically, yes, of course the referendum was binding. I very much doubt that if Remain had won the argument and the government had then decided that we were going to leave the European Union anyway, there would not have been many Remainers saying, well, fair enough, it was only advisory. If you play the game, you accept the result. When I watch Stoke City at the weekend, I accept the rules and the result. Though I have to admit, there have been many occasions when I would have loved to have been able to say that the goals against us were only advisory. So any amendment proposed during the passage of this bill, which has either the effect of seriously delaying the implementation of the verdict of the British people, or at worst rejecting it, should, in my view, be unceremoniously rejected. And what about the suggestion coming from the Liberal Democrats that it's not one referendum we need, it's two? No doubt they're hoping that the second one would go the other way. Have to say in passing that where I come from, it would make it 1-1 and we'd need a decider. But at least I have to acknowledge that a second referendum would be in the finest traditions of democracy, European Union style. Have a referendum if you must, but if you get it wrong, have a second one to reverse it. The EU has plenty of form on this. Ask the people of Denmark and Ireland. My Lords, a second referendum would be a betrayal of the record number of people who voted in June last year. The turnout 6% up on the 2015 general election. In my own region, 60% voted to leave. People were enthused to vote who never normally take part in elections, who were assured they'd been given a hugely important decision to make that was once in a lifetime. Say some opponents of the bill. The people were duped. They were fed false information. The referendum wasn't fair. The people didn't know what they were voting for. My Lords, I say this with all seriousness, with acute seriousness. In a democracy, we should be extraordinarily careful about using the argument that we know what's good for the people than they know themselves. My Lords, I've got some authority to speak on this because I have the dubious distinction of having lost more general elections than probably most people in this House. My record is played 8, won 4, lost 4. And the pattern when you lose is always the same. It's because your opponents made promises they couldn't possibly keep, you say. It's because they lied. It's because they had the press on their side. It's because they had far more money for their campaign. When you win, of course, it's a triumph for democracy. And on the argument that the public didn't know what kind of Brexit they were voting for, the answer is simple. They didn't vote for Brexit at all. It wasn't on the ballot paper. The choice was remain or leave. They voted to leave. Brexit may be ambiguous, leaving isn't. If you leave an organisation, you no longer sit on the executive committee, you don't have to pay the subscription, and you don't have to obey the rules. That applies whether you're leaving a political party, the snooker club, or the European Union. Now, I have to say, and I need to conclude now, that for those people in this House who are seriously thinking about voting against the third reading and voting this bill down, think very, very carefully about the implications of that. That would be a straightforward clash between the Commons and the Lords. It would, in my view, inevitably result in a general election very quickly after a decision such as that had been made. And we can all speculate about what the conclusion of that general election might be. My Lords, it's now 8 months since the people made their decision, and one which the Commons have overwhelmingly endorsed. It's now our job, as always, to scrutinise the bill in the most effective way, as we always do. But as our constitutional practice is made clear, not to thwart, delay or block the bill, and I am confident that we'll do just that.